The Jimmy Butler Warriors are cooking, and although I wasn't a big fan of the trade at the time, it is clear that it was a massive win for the Warriors as they continue to look like a dangerous playoff team. This is exactly why you trade for Jimmy Butler. The concept of the trade at the time for the Warriors was that they needed a star to take the heat off of Steph. They tried to go out and get Paul George. They tried to go out and get Lauri Markkanen in the past. They were trying to get Kevin Durant at the deadline, and ultimately, Butler and Golden State were kind of the backup plan for each other. Butler wanted to go to the Suns. The Warriors were looking at all these other stars, and it came together, and they have been an awesome fit together. This also gives them someone that has a little bit of an edge that isn't Draymond Green. We've heard Draymond be referred to as the Warriors' heart and soul over the last decade or so, and he has this edge and this physicality and this aggressiveness that Butler also brings, and that's something that this team needs, because as great as Steph is, that's not something that he brings, and a lot of their players are some of these, more finesse kind of guys, and Jimmy just gives them a little bit more of an edge. And the other part of this was that it was just going to give them a fighting chance talent-wise to compete with some of these other teams in the Western Conference, because as previously constructed, even though, Andrew Wiggins is pretty good, they just didn't have the star talent to realistically compete with these other teams in the Western Conference. That was the whole reasoning for the trade if you're Golden State. And for the Heat, they were just trying to get rid of Jimmy Butler. They wanted to make a chemistry play here. They wanted to get Butler out of there, get some assets back, and then build around the guys that they've had success with. Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Khalil Ware was coming along, and they felt like they had an opportunity to build an interesting group, just get away from Jimmy, not have to worry about the long-term money that they didn't want to give him in the first place. And in this scenario, they got Wiggins and a future pick, and they were going to be fine. The problem is the Warriors have taken off with Jimmy Butler on the roster, and the Heat are 1-6 as of recording this video since trading away Jimmy Butler. They just have not been nearly good enough offensively, and the talent gap between the pre and post Jimmy Butler Miami Heat is extremely significant. So why is this working for Golden State? What about Jimmy Butler is working for the Warriors? Well, obviously it allows them to give the ball to somebody else that isn't Steph and let that guy create offense. Because if you look at the Warriors roster, really for the entirety of the time that they haven't had Kevin Durant on the roster, and certainly since someone like Andre Iguodala hasn't been there, they just haven't had the kind of playmakers that they prefer to have around someone like Steph. They've tried to make Brandon Podziemski that guy. They've tried to make Jonathan Kuminga that guy. Obviously, Draymond is someone that initiates a lot of their stuff out of the post, but he's just not enough of a scoring threat for teams to really be concerned about it. So they've had to lean more into Steph on the ball, Steph creating out of pick and rolls, and they didn't want to have to do that anymore. They've always worked best when they've had some other kind of playmaker, some other kind of bigger guard, someone like Andre Iguodala, someone like Draymond even at times when he was a more offensive scoring threat. And Jimmy Butler fills that role for them perfectly. He gives them size. He can work out of the post. They can do a lot of their post stuff. And he just is such a better playmaker than any of the other star options that they had. And he's able to score, he's able to attack the rim. And most importantly for Golden State, he gets to the free throw line. This is a team that this season and going back in years past has not gotten to the free throw line nearly enough. And especially once you get into the postseason, that is a huge indicator of a team that has a healthy offensive ecosystem, a team that can get to the line and create easy points at the rim, and that is exactly what Jimmy Butler gives them. He also gives them the size to bully some of these mismatches. They don't really have a true post-up guy on the roster. Like, you're not going to give post-up touches to Kevon Looney. You're not going to give post-up scoring touches to Draymond Green. But Jimmy, if you want to switch, if you want to try and guard Steph Curry by switching all these screens and all these screens that he's running off of, you're going to put a smaller guy on Jimmy Butler. He is a threat in the post to back somebody down, to create, to play make, and it just gives them another option. They can go 10 possessions in a row with Steph on the floor and not run a single pick and roll for him and still get great offense for him as well as for others. The gravity that Steph provides is so much more significant now with Butler out there because there's just another threat. It's not just, oh, we're going to look at Steph, either pass it to him or pass it to the guy that you're leaving alone because you're sending to it Steph. The guy on the ball is a threat, and it's massive for them. There's also a bunch of other stuff that they're trying out. They're having, Butler screen for Curry on occasion. They're having Draymond and Butler screen for Curry. They're doing some of these post-up screening things. It's just an extra edge and a physicality and a bigger body and a playmaker that they did not have before. And it's such an additive thing because it's not like a scenario in Phoenix where they have stars and then you're adding another guy to it. Golden State needed star power, and Butler has been fantastic for them. Now, it's not that there aren't concerns long-term. You're still worried about some of the spacing issues that Butler could provide. He just doesn't take threes anymore. When he does take them, he doesn't really make them. And within the offensive ecosystem that the Warriors have, they are relying on a couple of guys to be able to make threes and not that many others. So when you have Draymond and Jimmy out there and then potentially Kuminga, there are some lineups, Looney, there are some lineups where you're just really running out of spacers. And that's something you could see as a concern long-term. But right now, this is absolutely working for Golden State. As we move forward into the playoffs, this is a dangerous team, assuming that they get there. They still have some work to do within the play-in and potentially get to the top 6. But the West is pretty wide open outside of Oklahoma City. Denver's been playing really well. The Lakers look dangerous with Luka. Memphis has been really good all year. Houston is young and up and coming. But realistically, if you're not OKC, you're kind of all on the same level unless you really like Denver or you really like the Lakers. There's a pretty wide open spot to potentially get to the conference finals. And if you get there and you're playing an Oklahoma City team that hasn't really been there before, they don't have a lot of playoff experience, and you've got Steph who's won multiple titles, you've got Jimmy who's been to multiple finals, that is a dangerous, dangerous proposition if you're the Oklahoma City Thunder playing against a team with that much postseason experience. If they get into that scenario, I'm certainly not going to be the one to doubt Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry's ability to get them deep into the playoffs. Now, we're obviously projecting. They haven't played, more than a handful of games with Butler, but there's just a totally different look, a totally different feel, a confidence level with this Warriors team that would make me nervous if I was one of these other teams in the Western Conference. But of course, with Jimmy, you also always have to be aware of the fact that this could just be a honeymoon period. We have seen this before with him in Philadelphia, even in Minnesota, in Miami. When things are going well, Jimmy Butler's a happy guy. Jimmy Butler's someone that you want on your basketball team, provides that edge, that competitiveness, and you love that. But then when things aren't going well, he can be not the best teammate of all time. He could force his way out of a situation. And the Warriors, one of the risks of the deal, one of the reasons I didn't love the deal for them in the first place was because of the long-term money they've committed. After the season, he's got 2 more years. He's getting paid like $60 million a year, and maybe that's enough to keep him happy. But if the basketball situation isn't what he wants it to be long-term, this could kind of be the last couple years you really have with a fully leveled up Steph. And then you've got Jimmy just there kind of unhappy, and he's got this big contract. And you just never really know with Jimmy Butler. Things can change at any time. Now, right now, there's no indicator that that's what this is. It looks like Jimmy Butler has completely changed whatever the Warriors want to be this season, potentially moving forward into the postseason as well. And I'm super excited to see how they continue to adjust things around him. Once Jonathan Kuminga comes back, does this Brandon Pajemski, uptick in play, does that continue? How much do they lean into Draymond at the 5? How much does Looney play? Is that a matchup thing? Because they do have a bunch of options. It's still a really deep roster going back to when they started the season so well. You still got Buddy Hield. You've still got, like I said, Pajemski, Gary Payton, and then you've got Jimmy Butler and Draymond and Steph and Looney and all these different guys. There's so many options for this coaching staff. And now with Jimmy as kind of the talent raiser, the floor raiser, the ceiling raiser for this team, I'm really intrigued to see exactly how they look in the postseason. It's possible that they, maybe they don't get there depending on injuries, maybe the play-in, maybe they actually have a terrible matchup and they play against Denver or something in the first round. Still a lot to be decided here, but compared to where the Warriors were just a couple of weeks ago in terms of a real postseason threat, the Jimmy Butler trade has truly changed everything for them. And I'll be the first to admit, I wasn't a huge fan of the deal then, but I'd be silly not to be a huge fan of the deal now after, granted, just a handful of games in Golden State. So we'll continue to keep an eye on them. We'll see what they look like when Kuminga comes back, but this is as good of a start as you could possibly hope for the Jimmy Butler era in Golden State.